The presentations were available in the Teams invite, and they're also on our website. There's the link to the website. I pasted that also into the chat. So if you want to access the slides in PDF now, you can. As I said, the session is going to be recorded, and that will be posted later this week to our website and to the YouTube channel. So you can go back and review it or forward it to your colleagues who may have missed it. My name is Sharice Knotts, and I'm the post president. We've got a few announcements and some information about upcoming programs. As I said, you can find the presentations. Reminder to keep your camera off and switch your microphone to mute until the Q&A session. You can also use the raise your hand feature if you've got a question. Feel free to put questions or comments in the chat as we go along. If you would like to get a PDH certificate for this, then please send an email today to Lindsay Edwards. Please try to do that today so that she can get these out in bulk. Her email address is on the slide there. I've also pasted it into the chat. I'd like to recognize the other members of our board who have joined today. If you guys can switch your cameras on for a minute, I'll introduce you. So again, I'm Sharice Knotts. I'm the post president. There's Margaret Burchin. She's our vice president of programs, responsible for getting the content like today. Do we have any of our other board members? Doesn't look like it at this point. Well, maybe they'll join us later. All right, but you can find out more information about the posts in the Europe region at their websites, and up on the screen are the websites for the various posts. These meeting announcement slides are also on the website, and the link posted into the chat. For the Rhein-Main post members, I'd like to let you know that our 2021 elections ballot went out last night, so please be sure to vote before Christmas, and we will install the officers at our first meeting in January. It was a Survey Monkey that went out. So if you are a Rhein-Main post member and you didn't get that, just let me know and I'll make sure to send it to you. So for the upcoming Rhein-Main post events, Margaret, would you like to talk about those?
So yeah, we of course we have today's event that we wanted. Normally we would have been touring the Henkel Champagne factory today or around this time period in celebration of the holidays, but instead we are going to be professionally developing ourselves with cost engineering because the Champagne place wasn't able to accommodate us in this difficult time, and we didn't want to do a virtual tour of that. So we'll save that for later. And then coming up in January, we have our annual program update from Europe District. We've potentially targeted for around the 26th of January. However, that might have to shift a little bit, but we'll keep you posted on the exact timing of that. It's always a popular event. And then we also expect to be doing a kind of an after-action review of the new TORN process with Europe District. Again, haven't quite scheduled the exact date, but could be in February or March. And then we're also looking at doing a cybersecurity challenge discussion in April. So those are others. And if you ever have, if any of our members have some specific topics they'd really like to see, that's exactly where I try to schedule things. So just shoot your ideas my way. Thanks.
Thank you, Margaret. And as a reminder, if you missed out on one of our previous virtual events, you can watch it on our YouTube channel. There's the link for that. So the Kaiserslautern Post, do we have anyone from the Kaiserslautern Post online? Okay. Well, next week they've got an interesting and relevant topic scheduled. It's for next Thursday, and you can get the link for joining the event on their website. It's an overview of the USAFE EDI program. They've got a number of other events in the planning stages, and there'll be more information you can find out on their website. The international community of interest, or international community of interest has their programs slated through April. In fact, I think they're booking even further. Is anyone from the international COI online that would like to talk about these events? If not, you can see you can see what they have scheduled, and of course, you can get more information on their website. What I've put up here is the SAME strategic goals through 2025, so you can see what we're all about. You know, our number one goal is strengthening industry government engagement, and we've got 2 events already planned for 2021 and may bring even more. Our second goal is to build and sustain resilient communities. Third is to develop leaders for the profession. Fourth is to enrich the STEM pipeline for the nation. And we do support a lot of our, when we get donations, goes to our STEM and our scholarship programs. We support the Robo Warriors out of Wiesbaden High School. We sponsor kids to go to the STEM camps. A lot of that was a challenge this year, but hopefully next year we'll be able to do that. And then finally, the 5th goal is to prepare servicemen and veterans for the AEC industry. Finally, I'd like to thank our sustaining member firms and members. You guys are our heroes. So next, I'll turn it over to Margaret to introduce our speaker, our presentation.
Thanks, Reese. So again, this topic we've been really excited to host because it's something that is super important to most of our clients, and specifically Europe District had asked for this topic because, you know, we've all had a lot of challenges with getting the right kind of cost engineering products, and it just to getting our projects kicked off and completed in a good manner. So with that, we've brought on a firm based in Europe who has significant experience doing cost engineering in the Europe AOR. And this is Aurora Construction Consulting. And we have 2 speakers today. I'd first like to introduce Mark Tyler. So Mark is the cost and project management lead at Aurora there in Europe. And there's Mark's, he's got his camera on. And Mark is based in Stockholm, and he was born in England and is also a citizen of Australia, having spent a decade in the construction industry there in Sydney. And Mark's most recent experience includes working as a senior project and design manager for a large building contractor working on the Australian defense projects, which of course are very similar to the ones that we work on there in Europe. And he has done both the design and the construction phases. And the project he worked on included upgrading and constructing new facilities and infrastructure for the Army, the Navy, and the Air Force there in Australia. And his last project, he was the project lead to build a new naval wharf with associated infrastructure in Sydney Harbor. And a fun fact is that Mark thought that spiders were cute when he arrived in Australia, and that he learned differently. Well, maybe you'll have to tell us that story later if you have time, Mark. So our second speaker is Jonathan Gorham, also from Aurora Construction Consulting. And Jonathan is a senior cost manager. He's located in Malmö, Sweden. Born and raised in San Diego, California, but I also happen to know he was an Army brat. His dad was a Signal Corps officer, or enlisted NCO. Yeah. And so he's lived a lot of places and lived the Army dream as well. He attended college in Oklahoma as a Boomer Sooner and received a Bachelor of Science in Business and Economics. Jonathan has 10 years of experience working in commercial construction in major markets such as Los Angeles and Seattle for large general contractors. He has primarily worked as a pre-construction estimator on a wide array of commercial and government projects, including renovations at Maxwell Air Force Base in Alabama, and also the Armed Forces Radiobiology Research Institute in Maryland. Jonathan has been living in Sweden since 2015. And his fun fact is that besides being a super duper cost engineer, he is classically trained vocalist as a mezzo baritone. So that's very cool. It's good to have
Maybe
a
I'll
balance.
get some Christmas carols at the end of this.
Yeah, that would be great. So that's our speakers for today. And I also want to remind those of you that are on, we're going to leave lots of time for questions because they're going to present quite a bit of info. So what we'd like to do is hold your questions though till the end. You can enter them into the box under the questions section as you think of them, just to grab them. But you can also, after we've done answering those questions, I'd ask that you just raise your hand, and I'll remind you that a little bit, and then I'll call on you. So looking forward to this a lot. And with that, I'm going to turn this over to Mark.
Thanks, Margaret. Okay, let me pull that presentation up so everybody can see it. And I'll take my face away from the screen so everybody can focus. Okay. Yeah, thanks for the introduction, Margaret. Yeah, as Margaret said, we are Aurora, a project management and cost estimating consultancy, construction consultancy specialist based in the Nordic region and the UK. This presentation, what's going to happen is I'm going to take you through a little bit of background as to what the company is, and then ultimately take you through to what we do and how we cost estimate here in Europe and the UK. And then I'll hand you over to Jonathan to take you through more sort of specific structuring of that RICS, Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors, sort of tried and tested cost estimating format that that's been done over hundreds of years here in Europe, and try to paint the picture as to how that differs from the sort of the cost book approach estimating that's predominantly done in the US. And obviously Jonathan, with his background's got a bit more experience in that, where we can sort of show the differences and the advantages of cost estimating the way we like to do it here in Europe. So, okay, so who we are. So this is predominantly the team that look after the US ACE projects. We've got a number of projects on the books at the moment with WSP. The way we resource those projects is really with Jonathan and Ben Barker, who couldn't make it today. He's actually suffering the effects we think maybe of COVID, but he seems a lot better today, so hopefully not. But he would have been part of this presentation today. But they're the two sort of cost managers and project managers that we've got that produce the estimating measures, and I'm really as a sort of peer review and lead to make sure that we're across the various projects that come our way. So a bit about us. You'll see from the map on the right hand side of this slide that we've got offices in 5 different locations at the moment, Stockholm being the primary office, and that's where I'm located. But we also have offices in Copenhagen, London, Helsinki, and Oslo. I think Jonathan's actually, you're down in Malmo, aren't you, Jonathan? So there's another small satellite office down there, but you can see the sort of the region that we do. But ultimately, our work takes us into into Central Europe and Southern Europe as well. So we're not fixed to those geographic locations. So we've been an independent construction consultancy certified by the Royal Institute for a number of years, since 2006. What the company tries to do is, with a number of international clients, is sort of bridge the gap and provide sort of international best practice within the local market, and also obviously using that RICS qualified professional accreditation to drive the quality within the business, and it sort of helps our clients then understand the process that we provide, and gives the right type of framework for the type of clients that we have. I think, you know, the company isn't just purely cost estimating, it's very much project management sort of life cycle. And we like to make sure that we provide that right sort of QSing framework and risk management, which helps projects from the inception through design right up to the very end. Just a quick slide to give you an understanding of the sort of the collective experience we've got, all the various sectors that we cover. I've got another slide in a minute or two that will show you the clients that we service, but it just helps you get an understanding that we're not just you know, a defence organisation. We cover many different aspects from commercial, residential, and even been involved with opera houses and the pharmaceutical industry. So all various types of construction projects. And this is the slide that shows our services. So you can see on the right hand side, there's the cost services. That's the traditional QSing side of the business, which is how the company was formed. But you'll see also, as part of our project management services, we try to get involved very early on with the inception of the projects, try to understand clients' needs. We might be talking to an investment bank, or, you know, a public fund which has to go through the business case process. Feasibility studies. We're doing technical due diligence processes on buildings here in Stockholm for potential investors, all the way through to actually managing projects. I know me and Jonathan are both working on a micro living property that's currently being constructed in Malmo, and I'm sure Jonathan will talk about that later, but that obviously involves a whole range of project management services that we have to do, and hopefully the rest of this presentation will give you a good understanding as to the reasons why we can not only provide just pure cost estimating, cost services, but we can actually then take that service all the way through to sort of project closeout, and help with the management of those projects. So our clients, as I alluded to earlier, with all the various service sectors that we cover at Aurora, we've obviously got aviation covered there with WSP and Margaret and her team within the defence space, but there's a number of other clients that we work for there. I'm relatively new to the business, but I know that historically the company has dealt with the large pharmaceutical companies, so companies like AstraZeneca, when they need to have a commercial fit out, refurb, renovation, or even construct new facilities, they get us involved from the very early stages. And that the micro living client that I alluded to earlier is Alon down there under residential, who we've got a number of micro living construction projects at the moment throughout the region, which involve sort of 450 to 500 dwellings within a building, and it's a sort of a new way of living. It's a sort of mid to long-term accommodation, studio type accommodation, with communal areas. But again, Aon have commissioned us as the project manager and cost manager for those projects, in which we get involved with from funding all the way through to handover. So we get to the topic. So quantity surveying and cost management. I just want to give a bit of background as to how the history behind the Royal Institute of Chartered Surveyors and what quantity surveying is perceived, how it's perceived and led in the European market and ultimately the international market. But you'll see that RICS has been around for quite a while. It's been around since 1792, a professional body. Ultimately, a surveyors club was formed in the UK, and it went on to become, the global professional body for promoting the highest international standards. So, I think the key for the Royal Chartered Institute was, it's trying to set the standard for the surveying, the art of surveying. Its focus is on obviously valuation and the management and development of real estate, of land, construction and infrastructure. So it's not just focused on any one particular area. It's trying to cover all facets of the construction industry and how that is managed through the surveying process. So that with that Royal Charter comes the promise of protected by professional indemnity insurance, which shows that, there's a level of professional service that you should expect from an industry point of view. So quantity surveying, if we go to the left-hand side of the slide, slide 9. As I said, the construction industry professionals with expert knowledge in construction costs and contracts. I think the key takeaway from this slide is that it's a body of people who have professional training in all areas of construction. So that's down to the technology, how we measure, the contract law that influences the technology and the measurement, and ultimately the economics of what we do. So these key sort of 4 skills combined provide this professional qualification, which then once qualified enables these professionals to take on projects through the construction life cycle, from feasibility all the way through to that sort of final account closeout. So I think the big difference with the sort of cost estimating is it's sort of compartmentalized. It's done at a certain phase, whereas this is very much, you've got a project now. How are we going to manage the whole process from cradle to grave? And the little diagram on there just shows what the QS philosophy is trying to achieve. So it's trying to estimate, a build cost that's as accurate as it possibly can through the various phases of the project. It's trying to increase transparency, trying to make sure that people understand what the costs are at any key stage of a project. It's trying to bring in the best practice that has evolved from its inception, and obviously provide an element of independent cost advice and accuracy as this project builds, and then ultimately create some sort of cost certainty for the project. So moving on to cost management. So as I said to you on the last slide, traditional cost management is a very simple slide to show the sort of elemental costing way that normally gets done, I believe, in the US Jonathan will correct me if I'm wrong, but a cost estimate is traditionally produced. Have you still got my presentation?
No, we lost it.
It just popped up.
Could you reshare?
Yeah, let me try. Right.
There we go. We
It's
can see
back.
it again.
All right. Sorry about that. I didn't touch anything. Yeah. Okay. You certainly don't want to see that stuff again. Here we are. Okay. Yeah. Okay. So what we're going to try and attempt to do now, I think, between me and Jonathan is explain the difference between the sort of traditional cost management model, which you provide a sort of a cost estimate up front, an elemental cost estimate, where it's you've got a project, we produce some sort of concept, and then the cost estimate is sort of retrospectively estimated, and then that cost estimate then eventually gets handed over to the procurement team, who then take that cost estimate and procure from that, but it won't necessarily be a cost estimate that will naturally fit with the procurement strategy. And then ultimately, once it's been procured again, it gets handed over to the sort of project controls, the local project team, who again inherit something that has gone through 2 phases previously, that ultimately could lead to a lack of transparency. The way that the estimate morphs through procurement into the project controls isn't necessarily as seamless as it should be. So I think what we're trying to do within the QS model is make sure that, as I said to you earlier, the cost estimate is reasonably accurate as we go through the design. It's aligned with design. It's then market tested whilst we go through that design phase, and then ultimately we can start to manage the cost estimate with a view to the procurement, and that can start to be restructured whilst with live information to suit the necessary requirements of the procurement phase of the construction project, and that can get qualified, as it shows there on the slide, and also ultimately take into consideration the contract methodology. So the procurement strategy, the construction methodology will then be sort of refocused and looked at. You can look at the cost estimate with that in mind, and divide it up accordingly. And then the actual QS model, as I said, from the cradle to grave approach, is that the QS stays through from design through procurement all the way to the very end, where they're in the construction phase, very much sort of managing the subcontractors, the construction team, and managing that initial estimate with the rigor and the detail that's been revised over the months and years of the construction project, to make sure that when the project is delivered, that the transparency is there, the project parameters are all sort of set up, and it's trying to be proactive for those 3 key elements, as you can see at the time: quality and cost. So what it's trying to do is to make sure that we are fully set up for the best possible outcome for the project. So I'm going to now hand over to Jonathan, who's been patiently waiting in the wings to take on this section of the presentation. He's going to take you through the RICS ICMS, which is the International Construction Measurement Standards. So I think what we're trying to do now is, rather than talk about the whole broad brush, we'll go into the detail of what that what the QS profession does in terms of the cost estimate and how it breaks it up and what the benefits are in doing it the way that RICS do it. Jonathan?
Great, thanks. First, I think it'd be good to kind of start with a state of play, or kind of where we are in construction, and how things are going. You know, construction-related spending accounts for 13% of global GDP. However, our annual labor productivity growth over the past 20 years was less than 1%. So you can see a real disparity in our productivity globally, which obviously translates into what it is locally. So in a large part of what the ICMS kind of came about was that as property, construction, infrastructure continues to become global, a lot of different players, a lot of different stakeholders, there was a real apparent need for international consistency in something very, very fundamental as construction cost in this classification, you know, going back to first principles. So typically you see, like, historically, these processes are often followed by local or regional customs and practice. Maybe they're bespoke depending on the company or the client, which a lot of times when you have so many different stakeholders in different places across the world and doing work distributed, especially in this environment, it becomes really difficult, becomes confusing, creates uncertainty and a lack of confidence for key stakeholders. So ultimately, big picture here, this ICMS, the standard cost framework thing, it's a framework for the total life of the project. So starting from design all the way to different costs of the acquisition, for construction costs, and also for refurbishments or maintenance of the building. It can all be in one place in one standardized format, that whether you're an architect, an engineer, if you are a project manager, if you're the client, you can all look at it in one format where you can understand this is what this project looks like. And I'll give an example of just what I've experienced as I've been working with Aurora. We were on a project in Norway where we would have these calls. The client was a UK-based investor. They were partnered with a limited partner from Norway. Our team was in Sweden that was doing the costing of the project. The architects were both from the UK and from Norway, and we would go around in circles talking about whether the level 1 was actually level 1, where the Norwegians were saying that level 1 was level 2. The people in the UK were saying that the first floor was at the first floor. And there was this whole confusion that we just went around for hours and hours and hours trying to figure out what actual floor we're talking about. And I don't know, it'd be interesting to hear from the people that are attending this, if you've experienced these types of kind of problems as well. And again, the project that we're working down here in Malmö, we have an investor that's UK based. Their fund managers are Danish. The general contractor is local, but they're owned by a Norwegian company. Obviously, I'm from the States. My coworkers are from Australia and the UK. The building is being built modular, and the modular supplier is in Latvia. And so you can kind of see why there needs to be a standardized framework for how to present the project and what you're building. So these standards, it came from the International Construction Measurement Standards Coalition, which was launched in Washington, D.C. in 2015. And there's over 46 professional organizations that developed this, that said, we need this in order to become more efficient and more global. We need to create a standard that creates transparency, that can people at any part of the stakeholders can understand what is going on in the project. So these standards are really intended to be used to compare historic, present, and estimated future costs of new projects, and also the retrofits and refurbishments and the maintaining facilities. So what is it good for? It's good for investment decisions. It's good for something that you can compare apples to apples. So if you have a project, say in Germany, and you're doing something similar in Belgium or in Norway, you can compare the project in a similar format and see what, compare it to apples to apples. And so one thing to that I want to highlight is that the ICMS is not to replace existing measurement guidelines necessarily. However, it's to interface with those so they're presented in a way and being able to be reporting for infrastructure costs to the stakeholders for the project at all stages that everybody can understand. So it's broken up into 4 levels, and I'm going to just kind of really focus on level 1 and level 2. Level 3 and level 4 are pretty similar to what you've seen in these subdivided categories of elemental costing. But what's great about level 1 and level 2 is that, for example, on level 1, you get a big picture of what exactly is the project that we're working on. For example, you can see the essence and the principal purposes of the project, what stage it is in, the dates, what's going on, what currency it's in, what's the function, what's the area, what's the soil type, location, the schedule, how is it procured, and the design life, and so on. Level 2, again, this would be like the more higher level cost categories. So these include capital construction costs, the total cost for each element and packages that are been defined in level 3, and then associated capital costs, including soft costs, which I think is really good because traditionally, from my experience as an estimator, we only focus on one little piece of the pie, where it is just the construction and estimating of that. But this ICMS is a big picture, the whole picture, again, so that every stakeholder can look at and understand. So if we can move on to the next slide, I can kind of show you a snapshot. And I'd like to, I think it's a little bit blurry, so I'd like to send these appendices later so you can kind of understand. But this is what you can see for that level 1. You can see the function of the building, office, shopping, the floor areas, how many stories it is, how many floors it is, what type of grade, what kind of performance that we're thinking of, or what type of building it is in terms of investment level. And then again, the site, how it looks like, what the currency is, and then going down to cost data, etc. So if we can go to the next slide, please. And level 2, again, this is a snapshot where you can see these, it begins to look a little bit more familiar of a elemental cost breakdown. But what this does is on the right side, you can see the percentage of the costs that are attributed to, for example, the substructure. And again, trying to create an apples to apples. If you have a office building that's a similar size, similar use, you can see, well, how much are we spending on the earthworks here on the substructure? What percentage are we putting towards the piling, the concrete, etc. Moving on, and then again, for you all, this is going to start to look more familiar here as we go down. If you've seen a costing structure, that this oh, here's actually this is level 1 cost example, or yeah. So again, another nice thing is that in this format, in this framework, you're able to break out a project into different parts, i.e. a building. It also breaks it down into infrastructure. So instead of you looking at a traditional estimate that maybe I would put together, we have a summary for, say, an example that we're building an airport, that you say, okay, Jonathan's airport, it's going to cost this much. In this format, you can see each building broken up, but also the infrastructure elements as well on the first page there. Let's see. So if we move on to the next slide here, and again, this is level 3 detailed. So this is probably looking more similar. So ultimately, again, this format doesn't necessarily replace elemental costing, where if you're familiar in the States, the CSI codes or uniformat, it's something to interface into a way to present it to the client so that everybody can understand it. So we can go ahead and move on to the next slide here. So again, and this also goes with what Mark was talking about with quantity surveying versus traditional estimating. this whole process and this whole framework is to have early involvement using benchmarking and market testing from different projects. It can be anywhere in the world because, again, it's a standardized format that you can see and really understand what is going on in the project at the different various stages. So all the way from design to the end of the life of the building. It goes all the way from the whole life cycle, like Mark said, from the cradle to the grave. So we can move to the next slide. Something that I think would be interesting for this is that, using this ICMS is a way to help us become more efficient and become more productive by utilizing a standard form and leveraging technology. So even though it can interface with classifying works and how you do it in civil engineering and also architecture, so that we can mend all of these different disciplines together. For example, in Denmark, we've had a problem with BIM models where the architects use one coding structure, the civil engineers use another coding structure, and then when it gets to us, because this amazing technology that we're supposed to have to be able to cost very quickly, it becomes useless because we're not able to interface and use that costing because both coding structures don't go together. So this ICMS is able to also be integrated within BIM to create that productivity. So the last thing too, and this has to go with the whole life cycle of the project, it creates a historical document that everybody can see and understand and have that transparency. So therefore, when it comes to entitlement of recovery, there's a history. You don't have to go around looking for, well, what did this person say about this? Or they costed it using this coding. I can't find what they're talking about. They used this thing for concrete. I can't find it, et cetera, but it's in one place. So therefore creating greater confidence over the validity of claims and understanding what people have entitlement to and what they don't. So we can move to the next slide. So the NRM, this is the measurement guides that we use. I won't spend too much time in this, but it's a pretty typical elemental structure, i.e. basing things on your substructure, your shell and core, and et cetera. So this is what the RICS standard is. And again, I can send out an appendix to kind of go with this. But again, these are some things that can interface into that greater picture. So we can move on to the next slide here. So again,
sorry, Jonathan, do you want to take this on or shall I take over?
Yeah, if you want to, sure.
No, you can keep going.
Yep. Okay. So the major differences, again, and I think is a big part of what I've learned about working in a QS model as opposed to the elemental cost planning, is that it's an overall understanding of the project. So if we look at the differences, so the classification costs, they're a little bit different, and they tend to be a little bit not as exact, but again, it's at a higher level of understanding of what the project needs, and also to go over global for the different types of stakeholders. So again, the big thing that I want to kind of push on this is that the cost framework can be understood by all parties. So whether or not you're using a bespoke costing structure, or if you're using CSI coding, Uniformat, or the NRM, what really this does is interface so that everybody can understand what is going on with the project. Again, typical substructure and superstructure delineation, that can vary depending on what part of the world that you're in. So a small example that I found about delineation is that here in Sweden, roofers might pick up the flashing, where in a market like Seattle, the roofers won't touch the flashing, it's somebody else. So it's things like that that you can see that really sort of create that standardized process. If we want to go to the next slide here, and I'm kind of going over a little bit of Mark's territory. So Mark, if you want to jump in, go ahead. But I just wanted to say,
keep going. You're doing a good job.
Yeah, and again, it's all about creating the standards. So like I said, so something might be done, a scope of work, you might say is in whatever market that you're in your mind, you're like, it's always this scope, this trade is always going to pick this up. However, you come to a new market, maybe you end up in Belgium or wherever, and you say, well, hold on a second, these guys, they don't do that, or they don't design, they don't engineer in the same way. So it's always to this process, the ICMS, is to align all of the design disciplines together and to cost classification according to those design disciplines. So it's similar. Obviously, if you've seen, I'm speaking from the US, if you've seen CSI coding, this structure of demolition, substructure, it's very similar to how we do those divisions of work, excuse me, whether earthwork, you have your concrete, your masonry work, etc. But it's just to make things clean, concise, so that if you are, for example, based in Washington, D.C., and you have a team that's based in Germany, and you have a local team, you guys can all be singing from the same hymn book, so to speak. And that's the huge benefit, because we spend so much time trying to understand the intricacies of every system that's created that we burn that productivity, and we're unable to really take hold of the opportunity of technology, that lean construction model that is possible. So you can go on to slide number 23 here. So for an example here, you probably all have seen this if you worked with USACE. It's just a cost summary breakdown example of how things are formatted. And again, this is something, this DD 1391 can be interfaced into ICMS so that all stakeholders are able to understand everything. So it doesn't matter, maybe you've never been on a project with USACE before, this can be translated into that, and that person can immediately jump on and start adding value. Slide 24, please. So again, we have a further breakdown of this, and using this system, with creating that standardization is that you don't have to necessarily worry about misinterpreting about how things are measured. So there's a standard for how everything should be measured, and all working again from the same page. Slide 25. Again, another way that the structures are broken down by element. And so this is for the M2 or ME cost book. And so the thing about working with cost books is that they tend to be a snapshot in history. And so what you can find, for example, that if we're using a cost book like RS Means with this M2 software to price a job in Belgium, it really becomes not very valuable, because that RS Means cost book is based for a specific market or a general market in the States and doesn't reflect the current market in, say, Germany or Belgium. But if we were doing it through ICMS, you might have another project in, for example, Germany at a base down the road. Or here's a great example. There's a water, what was it called? The fire pump renovations or whatever in Chivris, where they're doing another water loop just a little bit down the road at another base. So if we use this model, the ICMS, we can take that information and look at it and compare the two projects. Every project is different, but compare it apples to apples, instead of looking at, well, how much does a fire pump house cost on RS Means in whatever, like San Francisco, California, or wherever it is. It doesn't really, then you get to a situation where you're doing apples to oranges. But we want to be looking like for like, understanding that we have an international team, people that have different backgrounds, but we're following a similar process, and we can all see and understand and be able to deliver the work that's requested by our clients. Let's see, what do we have next here, Mark? Moving on.
So it's just the detailed estimate.
Yeah, exactly. So I think I kind of.
Could you state for the audience what slide you're on, please?
Yep, slide number 26. Let's go ahead and move to slide 27. So again, just a recap really of what I've been talking about. This is slide 27. So that we create a industry norm, a standardized cost classification, very clear delineation. So no matter what market that you're in, that everybody's on the same page. Cost structures that are aligned to design principles, which is really important because typically, again, in traditional sense, you have everything is very segmented. So it goes from the concept architect, and then it goes to the next part, and then it goes to engineers, and then it goes to a general contractor who then bids out the work, creating RFPs to subcontractors, and then it gets handed over. So this is like a holistic approach to what we're trying to do. And then in terms of cost, we're able to compare using market testing and also benchmarking, and then have a very increased cost certainty and traceability from the minute that the project is conceived all the way through the life of the project. So we can go to 28. Yes. So now I think we can.
Yeah, no explanation required, I think. Thanks, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you. Let's see. We have some questions. I don't know how we want to.
So, actually, the questions are not showing up. Oh, there we go. Okay, I got it. Sorry. So, yeah, I would like to help you facilitate with these questions, and they weren't showing up on my screen at first, so I can do that now. So, and before I jump into questions, Mark, did you have any summary, or are we ready for the questions right now?
No, I think, well, I mean, I could quickly summarize what Jonathan was just talking about in that, this presentation isn't a sort of a fixed all and doesn't have the level of detail. I think really the message that we're trying to get across is that things do differ from country to country, and what the RICS framework does is provide us with exactly that. It provides us with a tool that can hopefully sort of try to create clarity within the construction process and stop us redesigning the wheel each time. And obviously it sort of explains the cultural differences from what's being done here in Europe compared to what's traditionally done in the US. So ultimately, I think hopefully it gives the audience a sort of a snapshot understanding of just how things have been done historically here for the last, certainly for the last few decades, if not hundreds of years. It's really a sort of a body of work that's been evolved over a couple of centuries, really, to get to some sort of standardization for cost planning and cost estimating.
Great, thanks. And it's that was certainly a primary objective of our session, was to get exposed to a different method to ultimately to improve the cost estimation accuracy. So before I jump to the question, I do want to point out that Mr. Joe Copeland is our vice president at the Rhein-Main Post, and he wanted to point out that he is also an Oklahoma University grad in conjunction with Jonathan. So Boomer Sooners.
Boomer Sooner.
So Ed Regua, who's a AFCEC member, and I think probably a member of our Kaiserslautern Post, has asked, is the ICMS based on which country's standards? In other words, how does it differ from the Uniformat 2, for example?
So for the ICMS is based on the ICMS coalition, which is 46 members. So that's a large group of professional professionals. So it's like you have everybody from the Africa Association of Quantity Surveyors, the Association of Cost Engineers, Building Surveyors Institute of Japan, the Dutch Association of Quantity Surveyors. So you have this kind of a global approach to getting together and understanding how can we put something together. So in terms of Uniformat, you're still able to use Uniformat to interface with ICMS, but ICMS is more of a tool to present sort of on a global scale that everybody can work to. I hope that answers that question. Makes sense.
Okay, and we'll, again, the audience, if you want to ask more questions, you can also raise your hand and I'll watch for that. But before that time, I'd like to ask the next question also from Edgar, is at what level of estimate and what stage of the project do you find the ICMS standardization being more advantageous?
Definitely the beginning. That's where you're going to get the most value out of it in terms of, since it's an overall life of the building, and that's kind of what it's geared towards. So as soon as you can get on board with it, the better it is for the project. Yes,
I've heard that many times from cost estimators. Bring us on early and then we can begin helping from the get-go.
Yeah, exactly.
And I think it's a process that, you know, yeah, it's got such a good structure that, you know, you start with the level one, then you work through the levels, and ultimately as you work through the levels, it produces a better level one. I think that's how it's supposed to work. So you're getting the benefit as you work through the process.
Yes. And also from Edgar, on slide 27, he noted, how do you, and maybe you can move to slide 27, Mark, just so.
Sure.
Tracking. Okay. He's saying, how do you input post-contract award cost data into ICMS if the information is proprietary?
Edgar, what do you mean by what proprietary information? Or maybe Mark, maybe you understand it better. I don't know.
I'm not. Yeah, I probably need a little bit more detail in the question.
Hey, good morning. So depending on the contract data that you have, or the type of contract that you have, you might be working on an activity schedule, for instance. So therefore, you're not going to have elemental cost data to supplement your level 2, level 1 type cost data that you want to preferably input to your ICMS, therefore completing your model, if I understood correctly. This information is not normally readily available to us. The contractor bids on the project, gives us a price depending on the contract methodology we're applying. And then we simply lose track of the elemental cost data. So how do you obtain that? How do you derive that information to input into your data model?
I could probably answer this. I've probably got a bit more experience on the sort of construction phase side. Yeah, totally understand. It's not a straightforward process when you've got sort of an activity-based construction activity, when you're procuring resources. I think what the QS would traditionally do is obviously that when you're estimating a project, you're trying to create a framework that can be easily adapted to that sort of activity-based type costing at the construction phase. So you've got to try and have a sort of a best estimate, a best guess at how if it's a building, how it will be constructed, and you know, a time and cost estimate. And then ultimately it's up to the QS then to take the information that was estimated through the planning phase and try to make comparison to how it's eventually procured, and move those numbers into that sort of construction phase. Sorry if I'm sort of oversimplifying it, but I think it can get quite detailed when you're moving those construction costs through the various phases of a construction project. But I totally get the question in that you're ultimately going out to procure, and you're getting costs back that have been worked up in a totally different way. And I think that's where you have to try to understand how the budgets were derived, and how they are comparable to the actual costs during that construction phase.
It's similar to what we did when we were procuring for this project here in Malmö, that the contractor had their own way of showing how they were going to bid the job, and we had to almost basically translate it into the work packages that the client requested. So it's a similar thing, but again, if you can get this format early, and even have it in your RFP and say that we would like you to be able to feed this into the format, then you're definitely ahead of the curve.
Yeah, I think traditionally you try to start working out that procurement strategy during the design phase, and ultimately trying to package up the design to suit the procurement strategy, and then the cost estimate would reflect that procurement strategy, and then ultimately moving through the construction phase and post procurement, you've then hopefully got some comparable costs that you can manage as the project progresses.
Okay. And Edgar says thank you. I have another question myself. So the U.S. government in Europe, as our strategy as a nation evolves, they are often finding that they're moving into doing engineering in new countries where they haven't previously worked yet. And I would assume for our cost estimators, that's often the case for them as well. So what I'm kind of wondering is, when you're going in to do cost estimating in a country where you have never done it before, and it's new to you, and we know that there's a variety of things that are going to be new, including language and culture and building methods and supplies and materials, etc. What's your approach? I mean, what's the first sort of things that you start doing as a cost estimator to meet the challenges, and then what are your kind of biggest concerns or challenges?
Well, I think the approach is trying to remain consistent, to this very prescriptive ICMS approach. It's certainly worked in Central Europe and Northern Europe. I think if we were to come across a cost estimate for Southern Europe, we wouldn't do anything differently. I think we would still try to make sure that we were following this ICMS approach, because we know it's a tried and tested approach, and it provides the granular level of detail that should survive in any particular country. It's about getting the level of detail that ultimately, the construction process it doesn't differ from country to country. It's just the way people work within the country. So I think what we'd have to do is obviously go through a bit of learning, with some learning workshops with the local project managers and cost estimators, but ultimately we would be trying to remain consistent to the approach we've just presented. Jonathan?
Yeah, I think also too, what I've found in kind of transitioning from the States to here is going back to the first principles of construction and understanding material costs and labor costs in a region. And I think what this structure offers is that if you have other projects that have used this structure, which again, this is a new way of doing things. It's not very old. I think the first edition came out in 2017, but you would be able to see a project, even if it is a new country, other stakeholders that you're working with, even maybe a local person has done a project similar, and you can look through their ICMS presentation, how they presented it, and start to understand what the differences are, understand what the labor rates are, what the materials are, what are common materials. And, you know, one thing that's interesting is in Sweden, nobody does cast in place concrete here. It's just not a thing. Everybody does prefab. So coming from the States, it's like, whoa, okay, how does that work? And then starting to learn, okay, well, this is how things operate here. So again, it is workshops. It is a lot of humility and saying, can you explain this to me? How does this work? What scopes pick up what here? And then going back to first principles to costing it.
And this approach actually lends itself to that, because you know it's not fixed. It's not a cost book approach. It is actually allowing you to develop a cost estimate based on the local way of constructing. I'd second what Jonathan said there. Having worked in Australia, you know, if taking your example, it's exactly, it sounds like it's exactly the same in Australia as in the US, whereas, you know, when you're pouring cast in situ concrete is the norm, whereas as opposed to precast in certainly in parts of Northern Europe and in the UK. But ultimately you can capture that information within those early estimates, within that framework.
Yeah, and if you can understand it early, you know, imagine that if you're designing a building where it was 6 stories high and you'd specify that it was going to be cast in place concrete all the way up here, then you'd be in a real unfortunate position here in Sweden, because you wouldn't find anybody to be able to deliver the work, and then you'd have to pay for people to come from I don't know, Latvia or Poland, or companies, international companies, Irish companies, because that knowledge base just it doesn't exist here anymore.
Yeah.
For people to be able to manage it, to actually do it.
Well, I think that experience is really valuable. So each time you're gaining it, and then you can share it back with your clients. It's a big help. This looks like Joe Copeland, our vice president, has a question. He's raised his hand. Joe, feel free to turn on your camera if you're able. I'm not sure if you're able, but where you are, but.
No, I actually don't have a camera here in the office.
Yeah, I figured.
Mine was more of a comment. So I understand that the ICMS allows us from a structure, how we set up the cost estimate, and that standardization level of detail, all of that is helpful. And what I was going to say was, one of our problems we're running to is, as we're doing more construction in Poland, it's almost, if we don't have a real-time update of cost, almost like that year executed awarded contracts, we're already off on our cost estimates, because there's been so much construction ongoing. So almost real time, it's getting more expensive because of maybe saturation of a market, or limited workforce, or whatever the reason would be. What we're finding out is we have a cost estimate at the budget stage, and because of some of these requirements are moving so fast, we're moving through those phases very fast. We're doing budgeting and literally starting design very quickly, and then moving on to construction. And in a matter of only 2 to 3 years, we're missing cost estimates by as much as 100% in some cases. I mean, it's crazy that it has gotten so expensive in a matter of a couple of years in Poland, and it's almost a real-time cost adjustment. And so it's almost impossible to get in front of that, even with something like ICMS, where you're looking through there for recent projects or contracts to get cost.
And Joe, before we go over to our speakers to comment on that, could and especially because we might have some people in the audience that aren't as familiar with programming, but when you find out that a project is now almost doubled in cost, I mean, what do you have to do at that point to try to solve the situation?
Well, you have things like above the threshold reprogramming for certain percentages, but when you hit something that far, it almost kills the project. It's you almost have to go back to Congress, or depending on the program with the Army, for me specifically, it would almost fall out of the program because you would be taking money from other requirements. So it's when you take that much money, normally if it's just a little bit of an above the threshold reprogramming, the Army will go out and find bits and pieces of appropriations that are out there and cobble it together to give you the money. But if you're missing by that much, I mean, great instances, a bunch of fuel storage we've programmed in Poland. I mean, the price was 23 million in the budgeting stage, and then it came back in the 40 millions. I mean, the actual cost. So, I mean, just massive, massive missing on the cost estimating.
Yeah, and again, I was just going to say, if we're using a framework like this, you're able to flag it up early, and it shows if a project is going to be feasible or not.
And Jonathan, why you and Mark can also turn on your cameras if you want, so the audience.
Absolutely. So then you're able to say, hold on a second, this is getting ahead of us. Because I've been in a similar situation when they're having all those fires in Canada, and we were building a lot of buildings out of wood. So we were calling the lumber yard every day. What's the new price of lumber, of 2x4s? Because it was changing every single day. So in this case, when you're able to benchmark and you can say, hold on, something's way out of whack. We got to get ahead of this, or we got to flag it up and say, we don't know if this is going to be viable or not because of the market conditions.
And I think, the other problem is, as Joe was saying, I've been involved with a number of defence projects in Australia, and certainly in the infrastructure market prior to a year or so ago, before the pandemic, there was just too much work out there for the industry, and prices were going through the roof. And ultimately, we had a lot of public works that was approved by government to construct, and I was a part of one of those projects where we were $50 million short on the estimate because there was just no appetite from industry. And I think when you're cost estimating, I think ultimately you have to sort of draw the line to a certain point. I appreciate that market testing and benchmarking only goes so far when those extremes happen. And ultimately what we did in that situation is we got the Director General of the Defence Department and sat him down and took him through why the market was the way it was that particular year. But yeah, it's you don't want to put too much contingency into the cost estimate for those situations, because you could end up then looking like you've sort of been overcautious, and obviously government budgets want you to try and spend that budget that's been allocated. So it's a real balancing act, I think, from a costing perspective. You need to be as accurate as you can at that particular time, and I think that market testing and the benchmarking is fundamentally all you can really do at that particular time in the project. But ultimately, if the market, if the industry in whichever country or particular sector has a shortage and market forces start playing a part, then ultimately you're still going to be left with the same problem in that you're going to have a budget shortfall.
And when you have those, and that same subject, if you have that budget shortfall, and as Joe was talking about, you have to go get more money, those that have to get that money have to, they have to be able to justify it, not just cost more. So, I mean, how do you provide for that? What's your way of helping the client to justify that reprogramming?
Well, it is exactly that, isn't it? It's justification. So what we can then do is go away and explain why and do a market assessment. And obviously with this framework, we can then compare, as Jonathan was saying, comparing apples with apples. So if take a simple example, if a precast slab was costed at a certain rate back in 2018 when the budget was approved, and then you're going out to market 2 years later, and the cost of that concrete panel has doubled because the concrete manufacturers are up to capacity, and they've got no space left in the yards, and they're picking and choosing their work, and they can put up the price. Then we can then come back with that that comparison, that level of transparency to show what's happened in the marketplace, as opposed to what happened to our budget and how we came to that number back in 2018 or 2019.
Okay, and I see that, thanks. I see that Charisse has raised her hand. Charisse? Okay. Charisse Knotts, are you able to join?
She might
Sorry
be on
about
mute.
that. I
Okay.
am. So, following on the comment and question that Joe just asked, sometimes in some countries we actually see the opposite happen of what's happening in Poland. You know, where the 1391 programming budget is one thing, the design estimate is maybe compatible with that or comparable to that. But when you go out for bid, you find out it comes in significantly lower. When you're doing the estimating, do you take into account using local national labor or consideration, particularly in some countries where there's third country national labor coming in to do the work?
I think from my perspective, that's best practice, because you have to take in consideration what the local market is, especially for labor, because can be such a variance, and especially in different trades. So I think it's really important to have those conversations with local stakeholders in order to, because there's always going to be outliers too. There might be a construction company that maybe only does one job a year, and they, bid low for that one job, and that's their thing. So, but if it's, go ahead.
That's where market testing comes in. I think.
Yeah, exactly.
To answer Charisse's question, I think, having worked in the UK for a number of years, as well as didn't happen so much in Australia, but certainly in the UK, you would get subcontractors that would price works that were coming from the continent and certainly from Eastern Europe, and they were obviously their labour costs are greatly reduced as a result of the local labour costs. So we'd look to try and capture that at the market testing level. But ultimately, we would still factor in the fact that potentially that labour wouldn't be available at the time that it would be procured. So it's a real sort of balancing act as to how accurate you want to become off the back of that market testing. It needs to be balanced. It needs to represent the local market, and there's obviously forces at play within the local market.
Thank you.
Margaret, I think you need to turn your microphone on.
Thank you. So I want to ask a question. As you, what do you consider like is your biggest challenges to doing your job the way you would like to?
Biggest challenges.
What gets in your way of just having everything go well?
I think it's, for me, it's that consistent construction language, because it can vary so much, where, for example, you have in your mind of, like I've said before, like this scope should cover X, Y, and Z, but it doesn't in a local part, or having in design conversations that can tend to, if you're not careful, you can talk over each other and can completely miss the point, where you're both thinking that the two parties, if it's, for example, a Swedish architect and me talking about a certain part of the building, where I would describe it as one way and they describe it as another. It's like communication. It's constantly having to adjust for that, because it can get really difficult and draws out, and especially when there's bigger cost drivers that can be miscommunicated. It becomes a big hindrance for me.
So, sorry, just to follow on, Jonathan. So I would assume the solution is to those workshops at the beginning to get everybody on a common.
Exactly. You have to be on a standardized understanding about how we're talking about a project and what's the phraseology that we're using for a project.
Okay, and Mark, sorry.
Yeah, I was only sort of going to echo what Jonathan was saying, and but I think to add to the biggest challenge is, I think because we're in a project environment, each project team set up differently. There's different drivers for each project. Some projects are rushed, others have plenty of time, and that overall impacts quality. So you know ultimately we can only produce a quality document if we're being given quality from the project team. You know, certainly in the design phase, you know, you're heavily reliant on good different types of engineers who aren't just thinking about putting the building together, but they are thinking from a cost perspective. You know, architecture is another good example. You know, you can get architecture leads who want to create the most beautiful building without really thinking about the cost involved. And I think it's trying to manage those conversations through the sort of planning phase and ultimately into the construction phase. Is like Jonathan's saying, if you get everybody on the same page from the moment that the project's from its inception, then you're keeping that clarity as the project evolves. But everybody needs to be sort of like-minded, I think, within the team to make sure that cost estimate is populated properly with a fair amount of quality. In that, if some of the projects, from my experience, when they're rushed, you might have a cost estimate that's sort of 3 pages and it should be 30 pages long with detail. You know, and I think that's one of the biggest challenges. I inherited a job once where, you know, it was a $250 million job, and it got through the various planning phase milestones all the way to 90%, but the cost estimate just hadn't evolved because the guys working on the project hadn't focused properly, and they hadn't given the sort of due diligence to go through that cost estimate and get it to a level where it could be then taken through to sort of final construction detail and delivered it with any sort of accuracy. So I think that's from my experience over the last 10, 15 years, I think that's one of the big things that I see from a cost perspective. The cost estimator, you know, there's nothing worse if you're going out to market and you haven't had the rigor in the process through the planning phase to find out that you're $30 million short. You know, ultimately it's because you haven't spent enough time to go through that cost estimate properly and do the market testing, do your benchmarking, making sure that constructability is within that cost estimate. And ultimately the engineers with their specialisms have thought about it from a construction point of view. You'll get good experienced engineers that provide great levels of detail, and then potentially you could get a junior engineer who has very little experience, who just trusts your estimate. So I think, you know, it's not just the cost estimator that the QS. It's relying on the team and everybody's experience.
That's a super good point. Yeah, and you want to be you want the team to push you too to
That's
get
right.
the best estimate, and it takes all that diverse input to make sure you're on the mark.
Absolutely.
Yeah, good point. It looks like we have another question came in from Randy Smith. Randy asks, in use work where M2 is required to be used by the contract, how are you adjusting pricing when you are also using an RS means cost library?
That's a good question. That's a very good question. I mean, I think we've only done a handful of projects to this point, and we're still trying to work out the relevance of M2 when we're pricing, you know, from an RS means perspective here in Europe, and doing all the things that we've just presented. What we're doing is we're reviewing M2, and we're trying to understand what cost items we can use, but ultimately we don't feel that a large proportion of it, as the design evolves, you know, and we're producing 2 estimates, one with our traditional measure and market and benchmarking and everything else that we do, and the M2 cost estimate really, which loses relevance as we go through that process. So, I mean, ultimately, all we can do is sort of flag it, but I think what happens is in the real world is we end up producing an M2 estimate that reflects what we've done in RS means. Would you agree, Jonathan?
Yeah, and I think it's again, it's going back to first principles, where a lot of these, we always back in the States say sticks and bricks, right? Where if you have a project, for instance, what they've done in Norway, Matt Rawlison and Ben, looking at slabs and then going to the RS means concrete slabs and saying, is this relevant for this market, this cost? Does it fit? Is this a true cost or is it not? And then blending a lot of what is relevant and what is good information and quality pricing versus what is not, because ultimately the goal is to have as correct and accurate pricing of the project as possible. So it's a good tool. RS means those cost books they're good tools, but again, it's a tool. It's not something that you can just rest your laurels on. You have to always question it.
Good, thank you. So we are nearing the final time to end our program. I would just, I guess, ask the two of you if you have any last parting thoughts or suggestions for those that are out there doing military engineering. Want to wrap up?
Well, I think that sort of the last question was probably the right one. In the difference between how we do things traditionally here in Europe versus that cost book method is the crux of the conversation. And I think it really is all about expectation, I guess. We're going to keep producing how we produce. This is the service that you're procuring from us. But we need to keep that conversation live. If there's, I think the expectation will differ from project to project, from project manager to project manager. So I think we're adaptable, but we ultimately want to do the best, give you the best quality products we possibly can, and that's an accurate cost estimate as we see it at that particular time. So I think it's just the first conversation of many, I think, around the M2 and the measure that we would provide. Ultimately, we're procured to provide both, but we need to keep that conversation going as to what the relevance is of doing both.
Great. Well, Mark Tyler and Jonathan Gorham from Aurora, I want to thank both of you very much for the time you spent preparing for this talk and delivering it and answering a lot of good questions. I think we're all better informed on the ICMS method, and hopefully it's, as you said, it's going to result in better cost estimating products in the future. So again, thanks very much. And at this point, I'm going to turn it back over to Charisse, our post president, for any final thoughts.
Yes, thank you, Mark and Jonathan. This was very interesting and very informative. I appreciate you doing that. I want to thank everyone for joining today, and want to wish you a very Merry Christmas, and we'll see you in January. Don't forget to vote. Jonathan, do you want to close us out by humming a Christmas carol?
Have yourself a merry little Christmas. Let your heart be bright. From now on, our troubles will be out of sight. There you go.
It's very nice. Thank you so much, everyone.
Thanks, Buble.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.